From a young age, I've always thought that horror was one of the most interesting genres of media. Growing up, I found myself fascinated by scary locations or enemies in games, regardless of whether or not they were intended to actually frighten people. And outside of rare instances throughout my life, I didn't really play games or watch movies that were horror-themed. It wasn't until the past few years that I've really begun to submerge myself in the genre. But now, I've played my fair share of horror games, and I can confidently say, I think horror gaming sucks! Now look, I don't think horror games as a whole are bad, but whenever it comes to the act of actually scaring the player, I don't know if my testicles are coconut-sized or something, but I find that they hardly even attempt to scare me or make me feel even relatively uneasy. It's all too predictable. Games nowadays make it way too obvious to tell when you're safe or not. If you ever pick up a key item or see the autosave icon going off at a inconspicuous moment, oh boy, gee, I wonder what's about to happen. Perhaps I don't have enough experience to speak on this topic, but I did watch a long play of Silent Hill 2 in a bar last night. The sound was off, but I think I got the basic gist of it. I still think horror games are fun and all, and I enjoy most of the ones that I've played, but whenever it comes to the horror side of things, I don't think we've gotten a good horror game ever since Five Nights at Wario's, a true hood classic. And people want to tell me that gaming is better than ever now, please. So of course, you know that a game like Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion would be right up my alley. Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion is a horror game. And of course, as someone who actually values good horror, a game with the jump scare in the title would obviously be right up my alley. Because as we all know, jump scares are the highest form of shock value and leave a long-lasting impression on the player that they'll never forget. The issue with being as sarcastic as I am is not knowing when to stop. I heard of Spooky's years ago, with its first finished build releasing in 2015, originally under the title Spooky's House of Jump Scares. Later down the road, however, that name, which would have been a strong contender for my greatest game titles of all time list, had to be changed to what we know now as Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion due to a trademarking issue with a mobile game company by a similar name. That tragedy aside, the game got more patches, including DLC, and eventually got an HD re-release and another piece of DLC. If you're wondering, the HD renovation is the version I played, but you might have another question, and that's, why should I care about a game called Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion? Well, you're about to find out why. But first, I gotta explain this game's plot. Now, just as a fair warning, this is going to be a pretty lengthy explanation, as this game's story is pretty complex and hard to follow, but bear with me. Legend's tale of a very, very scary house. So of course, being the smart human being you are, you visit it. Inside, you meet Spooky, a ghost who challenges you to make it through the mansion's 1,000 rooms before saying, "So long, dumbass!" It's like Hotel Mario, but if it made me piss my pants. You then find yourself walking around the mansion's empty and foreboding halls. And it's not too long before you find yourself face to face with...
Are you fucking serious?
Krusty Bear, calm down, Krusty Bear, get behind me! So at that moment, you might think that this game is one giant prank and you just got duped like the idiot you are. Did I spend $10 on this game and choose to spend my life walking through 1,000 randomly generated rooms with silly cardboard cutout monsters on them that pop out and go... As you reconsider every decision you've ever made in your life, you begin to find notes from another poor soul who decided to waste their time walking through this Let's Player hellhole, so at least you know you aren't alone. But that might not be a good thing. A little ways into the mansion, you find a room where Chef Pee-Pee clearly peed peas. And upon investigating the peed peas are pleased with your presence, and before you have the chance to pee your pants, the peed peas proceed with their pursuit. Up until now, you just thought this was going to be a dumb troll game, but now you realize this mansion doesn't just have silly jump scares in it, it also contains several real threatening monsters, or specimens as they're called. As you delve deeper and deeper into the mansion, you'll find more and more terrifying specimens that you'll have to avoid throughout your trek in this 1,000 room nightmare. That is such a good bait and switch, because, you know, with a title like that, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. And for the first 100 floors or so, you just think that, oh, this is just a stupid game. But then you realize that there are real monsters in it, like it just pulled a double whammy on you. That's just genius. Before we go any further though, the rest of this video is a gigantic spoiler warning because Spooky lives and dies off of this gameplay loop. The specimens and their areas and gimmicks are the main appeal of the game, and to talk about this game any further, I will have to go more in depth with them, so if you like cool monsters in video games and know next to nothing about this game, then stop watching this video and go buy it right now. I promise you, you will get at least some enjoyment out of playing it. Anyway, as I briefly stated earlier, the mansion is made up of 1,000 rooms, but we can split up these rooms into two categories, the specimen introduction rooms and the randomly generated rooms. Let's talk about the random ones first. These rooms make up most of the game. Basically, have you ever played Persona 3? If so, I feel really bad for you, but the mansion is kinda like Tartarus, but imagine if it was good. There are people out there with less correct opinions that like to talk about how games with random level design always keep you on your toes and offer endless fun. And if you ignore the fact that I just insulted that group of people, I totally respect that opinion and all, but randomly generated level design is something I typically see as a negative. Sometimes I'm totally down for random dungeons whenever I just need to turn my brain off, but having real level design made by a human being is something that I surprisingly prefer greatly. So with that said, I think Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion is my second favorite game with not real level design. The game cycles between several different types of rooms and brings in more and more as you proceed further into the mansion. Every now and then, a specimen that you've previously run into will begin to chase you, and you'll have to avoid them while navigating each room until they stop. What makes the randomness of the rooms just a little bit more interesting than you'd expect is how each specimen's functions can determine how dangerous a room is. Let's take the Peas. He's very slow and easy to outrun, but while you're being chased by him, you'll have to maneuver around more PvPs that'll slow you down. Not only that, but he levitates off the ground and therefore can hover over gaps that other specimens can't, making him more of a threat in specific rooms than others would be. There's also Ringu, a ghost who typically isn't that hard to avoid, however she has the ability to go through walls, so any rooms that have tight turns suddenly become far more scary as she can easily get a cheap hit on you if you navigate the room at a certain speed. One of the more infamous specimens, the puppet, behaves like a weeping angel. In gamer terms, that means it's Slender Man! So in order to keep him still while he's chasing you, you'll have to be facing towards him and navigating the room backwards, which puts your memorization skills to the test. Because, you know, at this point you should know the room layouts by heart, but now you've got a new specimen that totally throws a wrench into something as simple as walking through a room. It's also worth mentioning that about halfway through the game, you get an axe that you can use to defend yourself against some specimens at the cost of your stamina. The effects vary depending on the specimen, but it's worth mentioning that using the axe too much can get you a bad ending, and you're perfectly fine just sprinting through the rooms normally, so I wouldn't use the axe unless if you want that other ending for whatever reason. I know it sounds like I'm beginning to gas up the random rooms a lot, so I should state that yes, this design approach still falls into the same trappings that every game with random level design falls into. It can get repetitive after a while, and despite everything I mentioned, it will not be everyone's cup of piss. I mean, you can essentially boil this game down to open door. For me personally though, the game is short enough that the repetition doesn't get the chance to set in, and also you'll never have to get through that many random rooms before you come across... The specimen rooms are easily the most interesting part of the main game. They're way more interesting atmospherically speaking, they involve more exploration, a little bit of baby easy puzzle solving, and they serve to introduce you to a new specimen that you'll have to deal with going forward. If you couldn't tell already, the game references and parodies a variety of different games and movies when it comes to these segments. The puppet is introduced in this area straight out of one of the N64 Zelda games, and even has a platform that behaves the same as the Lens of Truth. The puppet himself very clearly being inspired by the Happy Mask Salesman, who I remember a lot of people back in the day thought he was a weird, creepy guy with possible ulterior motives. This was around the era whenever a bunch of people would make dark theories about stupid games. But it's a pretty cool bit, though that's not to say that this thing is just a copy-paste of his character. As you get through these rooms, you find notes telling a story about a merchant in a village who made and sold dolls, and jealous of his success, the other villagers threw his dolls into a river to destroy them. But like a Redditor and his Funko Pops, the merchant went to go salvage them and drowned in the process. As the years went on, children began to start suddenly disappearing from the village. But oddly enough, dolls resembling the missing children would start to show up in the forest nearby. While he might be heavily inspired by a pre-existing character, he's given his own backstory and attributes that make him stand out, and in that regard, the developers succeeded tenfold as the puppet is easily one of the most memorable specimens in the game. One of my favorites was Ringu, not so much in terms of gameplay, but because of the build-up to her. She's the first specimen with a major change in setting whenever you reach her segment. It's a pitch black school, and with such limited visibility, of course, I was terrified. The best part though is that there's no noteworthy thing that triggers her spawn. You reach the very end of the place after going through it for so long, and all of a sudden, you start hearing her music, you instinctively look around, and oh shit! Hello, Luggician. She just shows up without any fanfare as if she was stalking you the whole time. I think part of the reason why most horror games don't scare me is because a lot of them make it way too obvious when you are and aren't safe. How many games have segments at them dedicated to building up the reveal of a new monster only to blow it at the end because, oh, I picked up a key item and there's nothing left to do in this area. Guess I better leave. I sure hope nothing scary comes to chase me. Not that Spooky doesn't do that, but more often than not, you can't gauge how long one of these specimen areas will be, and suddenly you'll unexpectedly come across a new monster. Is that because this game probably has the budget of 2 quarters and a bag of Fritos? I mean, maybe. But hey, that works in its favor, and it still does a good job at building tension anyway. So yeah, Ringu's pretty cool. The only bad thing about her, and it's kinda hard to not mention it, but every specimen has a unique game over screen and way of killing you. It's a really cool touch and adds more uniqueness to all of these already unique monsters, but unfortunately, Ringu's involves... My favorite has to be one really late into the game. You find yourself in a mansion inside the mansion.
Wow, what a mansion!
As you explore this mansion, you have to hide from a lunatic with a scythe. I've never played a clock tower game, unless if you want to count Haunting Ground, but this is a clear homage to it, with the dude acting like Scissor Man. But the cool part is that this random guy isn't the specimen. He's just another person who stumbled across this place and went insane from the influence of the actual specimen, this mini mansion itself. He's essentially a byproduct of the true specimen. I adore monsters or enemies that are just normal people who just so happen to get caught up in a terrible shitstorm like this. One more cool one. In the original release of the game, there was a part where you're suddenly in a space station. Then the power goes out and you're forced to crawl through the vents, but I'd prefer it if you just ignored this sentence entirely. And in the original version of the game, when you got out and got the power going again, the Alaskan bullworm from SpongeBob shows up and he chases you in the same manner as every other specimen in the game, and nobody liked it. I remember the first video I ever watched about this game years ago specifically noted that this specimen was kinda dumb and redundant. So the lead dev took this criticism, and in the HD version, the worm underwent a revision, and by that I mean he suffers the same fate as my dog after eating at Taco Bell. So the new specimen is this shape-shifting parasite that requires you to stay dangerously close to it, otherwise it morphs into a nimble little maggot that outspeeds you. Now, personally speaking, I think this thing is really boring to get chased by because all you really do is let the vagina monster follow you like you're doing an escort mission, but I can let that slide and give this new guy bonus points for the concept alone. Killing off the old creature nobody liked to usurp its place is probably the most badass introduction ever. And the best part was that going into this game, I only knew about the worm. So needless to say, seeing this new thing completely blindsided me. Now, as much as I would like to say all of the specimens are hits, there is unfortunately one outlier that is far and above my least favorite. The last specimen before the ending is in this amnesia-inspired area, and that in of itself should be a red flag because even though I've never played it, I'm going to blame that game for making horror games lame for several years, but I digress. So once you solve some puzzles and walk around for a little bit, you come across what appears to be a siren, who soon dives into the water where you can no longer see her. The rest of her segment involves you playing the floor is lava and getting on top of these boxes when she's around, preserving your stamina and getting through the rooms as quickly as you can. However, while her chases certainly had more effort put into them due to her rooms being tailored specifically for her, ultimately this was by far the most boring part of the game for me. I ended up having to deal with her for most of the last 100 rooms, and she only has like a few rooms to cycle through, and unlike the other specimens, there isn't much you can do to speed up these segments without putting yourself in danger. That thing I said earlier about the game not becoming repetitive despite most of it consisting of repeated rooms manages to somehow not apply it to the last last 100 rooms of the game for this specimen alone. I only got the McDonald's manager to chase me one time, yet I got stuck with Minecraft the floor is lava for the last 10th of the game. It's like payback for all the times I dissed Wet Dry World. Though, with that said, there's one last specimen worth mentioning, that being the elusive Specimen 9. A Specimen 9 is one that you likely won't encounter, as it was seen as so dangerous that it had to be dismantled. However, if you remain idle in any room for too long, or get curious and decide to walk down this suspicious yet enticingly long hallway, you'll run into him and meet an untimely fate. So you might be wondering, what is Specimen 9? What is he doing here? And why does he look like the red guy from that overrated Godzilla NES creepypasta? Well, every specimen in this game has its neat backstories, such as the puppet I mentioned earlier. You'll learn these through notes laid out in the environment or through their cat-DOS logs you can find every now and then. But Specimen 9 requires a little more historical knowledge and investigation to learn about. And we're all gamers, so of course we don't have any idea what the fuck this thing is. Specimen 9's existence ties back to real-world events involving Unit 731, a Japanese research department that developed biological weapons and served as a human experimentation facility. The human test subjects here were treated as logs, as if they were building blocks rather than real people. These inhumane experiments resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of those who were unfortunate enough to be held as prisoners here. It's a very disturbing piece of human history, but you might be wondering, weren't we just in Burger King an hour ago? Specimen 9 is a proposed survivor of Unit 731, and the game doesn't make this obvious at first. You have to pick up on the little clues given throughout the game that link the two together. Specimen 9 serves as the game's final boss, and I think it's a very fitting role. He's by far one of the most interesting monsters in the whole game, with the most horrific backstory among them all. And as opposed to the other specimens who are based off of some other pre-existing property or fictional piece of media, Specimen 9 contrasts with that by being based off of real-world events. I know it might seem a little jarring that this game with a bunch of silly moments and monsters that are primarily based off of other fictional creatures has the final boss be something that's inspired by a horrible real event, but like I stated, that inspiration isn't that on the nose, and I feel like those who aren't aware of the unit will have all this completely go over their head at first. It's one of those things where you have to do some digging to find a connection, but when you do, it makes you reconsider everything you previously knew about the monster. And I like it when games can make you piece together clues like that and discover new things regarding the plot after you finish them. Plus, I think this game has earned at least one really serious monster. Gotta love that spooky lore. Oh, and the fight against it is really cool from a visual standpoint. His attacks are sick looking, and he starts screwing around with the screen to throw you off. Bro still thinks he's Ganondorf and ends up in the Dollar General tier of final bosses, but hey, for what it is, the fight is pretty neat. Afterwards, you die, become a ghost, and then Spooky decides to declare war on the human race. The end. This is probably unironically a better plot than half of the games I've dedicated a full video to, and I don't know if that's sad or not. Yeah, this game can jump between being scary and silly in a surprisingly seamless manner. I don't know if this is going to sound dumb or not, but despite seeming really fucking stupid from an outsider looking in perspective, this game has surprisingly good atmosphere. Bro, there's literally nothing going on and I'm about ready to start running a lemonade stand.
Time to take a piss.
Sometimes though, it likes swapping the more chill music, yet it still feels tonally appropriate, because when you do get a break from the numerous hellspawn chasing you, the game is really chill and understands when to wind down. And that's helped by its sense of humor also. If the cardboard cutout jump scares weren't a good enough indicator, this game likes to be absolutely stupid at times. Spooky herself is such a genius antagonist. She never taunts the player or anything. At worst, she just seems mildly annoyed as you reach the end of the mansion. But throughout the game, she participates in a fair amount of trolling. Like one part where she rewards you with unlimited stamina, but it's like a monkey's paw situation because the reason why you have unlimited stamina is because you can no longer run. Or when she sends you down a shortcut that temporarily takes you back to the very start of the mansion. And the fact that she never acknowledges how she's harming you just makes these moments all the more funny. She would be perfect as the host of one of those killing game visual novels. Maybe then we would finally have another good book game. I freaking adore games that can be totally serious one moment and then be dumb the next without managing challenging to feel completely jarring somehow, and this game fits perfectly into that category. The only other thing to touch on when it comes to the main game is endless mode for those of you who eat regular Pringles instead of the pizza ones. Though endless mode here certainly has its appeal, as there's exclusive content here to help set it apart from the main game, such as unique rooms and, most importantly, new specimens. Specimens from the base game and DLC can show up, but on top of that, there are brand new ones specifically made for endless mode. A lot of these are references to other horror games like PT, Five Nights at Wario's. Oh, and Whiteface from I'm Scared can show up too. I've never played that game because I treat my computer better than my wife and kids, but I probably would have shit myself if I didn't know about his inclusion prior to playing the game. Unfortunately, I couldn't really get any of the cool stuff to spawn from my time with the mode, but at the very least, I did run into interesting encounters, like when two specimens chase you at once and require you to accommodate to both of their gimmicks. It adds a lot of creativity to the old, tired specimen chases. But that's not what I was most excited to talk about. This game also got DLC that's bundled with the HD renovation. These two DLC stories being Karamari Hospital and Spooky's Dollhouse, both of which serve to flesh out the story of the game and offer a more fulfilling conclusion than just dying. Karamari Hospital starts just a few rooms before the final boss fight would have occurred. Shockingly enough, you find yourself in a hospital deep beneath the mansion, and even Spooky is all like, so now you start exploring the place, and you... Wait a freaking second. Dude, this is level design! Man, Persona 3 fucking sucks! The hospital is laid out like an area in a classic survival horror game, where you explore around finding key items and solving puzzles to progress. However, just like the main game, there are still new specimens to deal with, or in this DLC's case, monsters. There's Mr. Hands, this scary burrito guy, and a baby in a cage will never catch you unless if your brain stops functioning, which if you're watching this video, then that must mean you experience that quite often. I will say, what Karamari Hospital has in atmosphere and puzzle solving, it lacks in monster design, especially in comparison to the main game. The monsters here just aren't as memorable or even as threatening as they are in the main game, and as far as I'm aware, there's no interesting lore involving most of them, making their existence feel more like an obligation more than anything. Though I will say, the mummy thing in the basement gave me a good scare, and I was panicking so much trying to figure out how it functioned that I ended up accidentally moonwalking down an endless hallway where I met my untimely fate, got a seizure, and suffered my first death in the whole game. What makes it so effective is that it appears to move less when you're looking at it, but that makes navigating this absurd maze underground all the more confusing and terrifying. There's also this thing that was apparently in the scary cage place, but I never saw it the whole time I was there. What on God's green earth am I looking at? Karamari Hospital isn't that long. I'm pretty sure that this video will end up being longer than my recording of this DLC, which was like 30 minutes, but I mean, it's certainly worth a playthrough if you enjoyed the main game. The monsters aren't as good or fleshed out as those in the main game, sure, but it makes up for that in the exploration department. Sometimes it's nice to have a little game that resembles an area in a classic horror game, and in that regard, I think it succeeds. I should also bring up that for some reason, it has New Game Plus, which is really weird. It mainly involves a side quest using a sword to kill the monsters or something, but you also get access to new secrets like finding special guest Skibbity Toilet. So yeah, for what it is, Karamari Hospital is pretty cool, but bro ain't got shit on Spooky's Dollhouse. Following the previous DLC, well, I bet you can't guess the plot of this one. Oh, Dollhouse? Okay, bye. Getting really tired of these War and Peace ass plot summaries. Dollhouse follows a very similar formula to Karamari Hospital, but it's longer, a lot more fleshed out, and in my opinion, the best part of the whole game. It feels like RE1 Remake, but with a more point-and-click visual style applied to the puzzles. Aesthetically, it's unlike any other part of the game. There are cool effects on interactable items and small dialogue boxes that prompt up when you examine things in the environment. You'll find yourself solving puzzles with this doll. You're oftentimes required to use it as a key to progress, such as placing it on platforms to open door or trigger other mechanisms. Just mind where you use it, though. What'd you do? What did you do?
Thinking you might want some help.
Yeah.
So I moved all those dolls out of the way. Well, have fun.
Okay, real quick. No, wait, what have I done? It's more cramped than Fat Albert's pants up in here, so you'll have to juke around enemies to avoid damage. Unlike the main game, you don't naturally regenerate health, which I think is intended to further the survival horror vibe this DLC is going for, but the issue with that is that you can literally quit out to the menu and reload your save and you'll be at full health. This probably would have worked better if you had to search for healing items or something, but I suppose that if you weren't as badass at spooky as I am, then you'd find yourself getting soft locked. I don't know, ultimately the whole survival part is pretty underwhelming. And not to mention, I find that the specimens in this area are honestly worse than those in the hospital, as they're not that threatening, they're extremely easy to run past despite the tighter hallways you find yourself in, and I don't even think their designs are as unnerving. Alright, so there's this room that you walk in where you find a clown in a cage, right? The past 20 years of human history have been solely dedicated into making clowns scary, so of course I was unnerved at the sight of this dude, and of course at a certain point he gets out because he's an enemy in a horror game, but I never ran into him. I think he's supposed to be somewhere around here, but like, where did he go? He ran away and he never looked back. There was a point where I thought I was about to run into him again because my doll was looking scared like it did in his room, and I was so terrified that I ended up getting on the tram that you're not supposed to get on until later, and then, Oh, no, hey, I forgot, I haven't killed you. Oh, no, I haven't killed you yet. There's also a part where you have to do an advanced specimen chase involving one of the main game specimens, and I was unfortunate enough to pick the Deer Lord since he's one of my favorites. He's a beloved yet infamously underwhelming specimen in the main game who had no noteworthy gimmick to his name, so when it came time for the Dollhouse, bro got patch notes. He can teleport through walls if he loses his sights on you, and worst of all, in this specific segment, he summons deer that can also damage you if you get too close to them. I didn't try the other chase options, but this easily made for the most stressful and challenging chase in the game, so I guess it sort of makes up for the rest of the DLC being easy. But again, like the other parts of the game, Dollhouse has a primary focus, and this time, that would be the puzzle solving. And, oh, the puzzle solving's so fun. That's probably due to the presentation. It reminds me of point-and-click games or old text-based adventures. I haven't really been interested in either genre in a long time, but I think there's a part of me that secretly still loves that stuff. So slap on a horror coat of paint and of course I'm going to have a fun time. However, Dollhouse also serves as a proper conclusion for the game story-wise. While I've delved into some of the backstories regarding the specimens, I've never explained what happened with Spooky. As you find out through notes and a flashback sequence, Spooky was once a normal human being who loved to scare people for fun. She wants to not be seen as cute, she always wanted to be able to scare people. And I've always wanted to do YouTube for my career, but dreams don't always work out, huh? Unlike me, however, Spooky one day succeeded, but to her own detriment, as the person she managed to scare ended up being so frightened that they shot her in a panic. Sounds like an overreaction, but details strewn throughout each of the big 3 parts of the game provide the player with a better idea of what happened. The mansion has a secret minigame that vaguely tells the story, and a note in Karamari Hospital reveals that the one who shot her suffered from PTSD, explaining why they reacted the way they did to being startled. And if you go out of your way to collect various items in the Dollhouse and go through with the Hellgate chase, you can proceed with turning off the seal deep within the lab of the Dollhouse. But first, you go through a nightmare sequence from the perspective of the person who shot Spooky, and as it turns out, it was none other than her own father. Of course, he desperately searched for a way to bring her back, which I can assume led to the development of this lab and the dolls, which I'm pretty sure are supposed to be hosts for lost souls. But none of these experiments ended up working, and all that became of it was the mansion filled with horrific monsters that you see now. And after the nightmare, you finally get the opportunity to end this horrible tragedy once and for all. So now that that's cleared up, well, what would Obama do? That's right, buddy, we're gonna blow this place sky high. Oh no, sir, please, out of the way. Oh my god. Oh, please, oh, this is crazy. Oh! And after making our daring escape on the tram, we find ourselves outside of the mansion and watch as the countless souls trapped inside are finally freed, including Spooky herself. And that is all there is to the Dollhouse and Spooky's Jumpscare mansion as a whole. It's nothing outstanding and nowhere near comparable to that of a classic Resident Evil or Silent Hill game, but why would you expect that out of Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion? It's doing its own thing and it's got its own charm. It pays tribute to countless other games but plays off those homages with an original flair. In the process, spawning some of the most memorable monsters I've seen in any horror game in a long time. Despite coming across as a goofy game, it understands when to play things seriously and make memorable encounters and moments, while also having a great sense of humor that never clashes with the horror. And the DLC adds more exploration that was previously lacking in the main game and turns this small project into a complete package. It's surprising just how many small details and secrets there are in what's supposed to be a small $10 game. And I know it seems like I'm gassing it up, but look, while it's not amazing or anything, I judge games based off of what they set out to accomplish versus what they actually manage to accomplish. And I think Spooky does everything it sets out to do, and over time has gone beyond that point. It's a fun, silly horror game with cool monsters, some interesting lore, and a ton of heart. And really, that's all I can ask for from a game titled Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion.